Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with Part 2, Atlantis, the Lost World. From Atlantis, an interpretation by Manly P. Hall. Atlantis, the Lost World. In 1915, Monsieur Pierre Termier, a member of the Academy of Science and Director of Service of the Geological Chart of France, delivered a remarkable lecture on Atlantis before the Institut Oceanographique. This lecture was translated later and published in the annual report of the Board of Regents of the Smithsonian Institution for the year ending June 30th, 1915. The valiant French savant declared, "It seems more and more evident that a vast region, continental or made up of great islands, has collapsed west of the Pillars of Hercules." Monsieur Termier's reasons were purely geological and have been well substantiated by subsequent findings. Theopompus and Marcellus, ancient historians, refer to both a continent and islands in the Atlantic Ocean. Marcellus writes of 7 small islands and 3 great ones, which together constituted the Atlantides. Confusion is continually arising as to whether the 7 islands mentioned were acutely 7 independent land areas or merely 7 national divisions of the great continent itself. Many volcanic cataclysms occurred before the last upheaval, which finally destroyed Poseidonis, the name given by the Greeks to the last form of the great oceanic continent. The Azores are now regarded as remnants of the mountain peaks of Poseidonis. In Isis Unveiled, H.P. Blavatsky calls attention to the fact that both the story of Atlantis and the name of the country itself came to the Greeks as an historical inheritance from remote antiquity. Crantor, writing circa 300 BC, declared that in his time, the Atlantean pillars at Sais, described by Solon, were still in existence. It was from the writing upon these columns that the Egyptians had deciphered the Atlantic story. Having exhausted the possibilities of the Greek and Egyptian writings, at least until more records come to light, we are justified in turning to the peoples of the old Americas for such information as they may possess on this fascinating subject. It is possible that Poseidonis was the land of mud, which, according to the Troano Codex, an early writing of the Mayas of Yucatan, was destroyed in the year 6 Khan on the 11th Mulak in the month Zak. Recent discoveries in the departments of Aztec and Mayan chronology now substantiate the approximate date of the Atlantean destruction as preserved by Plato. The time of the submergence of the last remnants of the old Atlantean continent would thus be fixed at approximately 9500 BC. But when the Codex declares that the land of mud was sacrificed, the 10 countries were torn asunder and scattered, and finally sank, carrying their 64 million inhabitants with them, it should be remembered that the 10 countries coincide exactly with the number of islands mentioned by Marcellus and the 10 kingdoms described by Plato. The word Ad itself, like many other Nuatl, Egyptian and Greek roots, is probably directly Atlantean. Le Plongeon has shown the similarity between certain Mayan glyphs and the Egyptian hieroglyphs. Gerald Massey assembled an impressive array of parallels in the word forms of widely separated races. The oldest forms of Sanskrit indicate parallelisms with the language of Central America. Research is building up evidence that Mayan is a very ancient language of definite Atlantean origin. The following sentences from Baldwin's Ancient America are illuminating. The words Atlas and Atlantis have no satisfactory etymology in any languages known to Europe. They are not Greek and cannot be traced to any known language of the Old World. It would seem reasonable, therefore, to search for the origins of these words in the etymological systems of ancient America. The only part of the New World which developed a refined historical system or perpetuated a systematic record was Central America, composed of the area extending from southern Mexico to the northern parts of South America. It now appears reasonably certain that the words Atlas and Atlantis have their origin in the primitive American word Atl, which means water. In the calendar system of the Aztecs, the month Atl was associated with rains, floods, and storms. Its hieroglyph was water from heavily laden clouds. The association between the conception of the universal deluge, which destroyed the prehistoric world, and the root word signifying deluge and inundation should not be dismissed as coincidental. Early European historians were so profoundly impressed with Plato's detailed description of the Atlantean Empire that until the beginning of the 16th century, designers of maps often included the Atlantean islands in their charts and globes. It was only after the discovery of America that this practice fell into general disuse. While Plato took liberties with the old legend, it is obvious that he did not originate the name Atlantis. Had Plato or any of the Greeks fabricated the name for Atlantis, they would have selected a word derived from their own speech to designate the continent. The same could be said for the Egyptians. These learned people bestowed upon their gods and heroes a multitude of names and titles derived from their own language. The derivation of the name for the lost continent from a dialect in the distant Americas is significant. There is much evidence of Atlantean blood among the Red Indians, the Bering Straits migration theory notwithstanding. It is highly possible that Asiatic tribes also reached this country, and by the mingling of two definite strains of blood, produced what we now term the American Indian race. In fact, more than two races may be represented in their bloodstream. John Johnson, ESQ, in Archaeologia Americana, says that the Shawnees, an Algonquin tribe, have a tradition that their ancestors crossed the sea. These same peoples preserved for many centuries an annual ceremony in celebration of a deliverance, but it is impossible to discover the nature of the evil which they providentially escaped. The catastrophe must have been of considerable import to have become the subject of such perpetuation. May it have been their escape from the sinking Atlantis? Schoolcraft in the Indian tribes of the United States says they relate generally that there was a deluge at an ancient epoch which covered the earth and drowned mankind except a limited number. Even the Chinese perpetuate an account of the flood, and as it is quite evident that the earth's surface never was entirely inundated, all these accounts may be traced to the Atlantean catastrophe. There is no more significant fragment bearing on this subject than the famous speech which Montezuma, the Mexican king, delivered to Cortés, the Spanish conqueror. I would have you to understand before you begin your discourse that we are not ignorant or stand in need of your persuasions to believe that the great prince you obey is descended from our ancient Quetzalcoatl, lord of the 7 caves of the Navatlax, and lawful king of those 7 nations which gave beginning to our Mexican empire. In several of the Mexican codices, the origin of the people is symbolically set forth by diagrams showing 7 irregular circles, presumably intended to represent caverns. In each of these is a twisted-up human figure resembling an embryo. These 7 are the progenitors of the race. If we are bold enough to claim that these so-called caverns really signify islands or continents, we shall not be more daring than Colonel Hamilton Smith, who advances this same hypothesis in his learned work, The Natural History of the Human Species. It should be quite evident that when Montezuma refers to Quetzalcoatl as the Lord of the 7 caves, he does not intend to convey that the divine man, Prince Feathered Serpent, was literally a ruler over 7 caverns. It is a common legend among the American Aborigines that their progenitors came forth out of openings in the earth, ascending from their subterranean abodes to escape a flood or deluge loosed by one of the gods of the underworld. In the Navajo account of the deluge, 7 deities were involved. The whole account may be a survival of the primitive agricultural mythos. This legend suggests that the Indians had originally inhabited the lowlands but had fled to the mountains to escape the terrible tidal waves caused by the Atlantean disaster which, temporarily at least, inundated great areas of the earth. Plato infers that the Atlantean deluge was loosed by the gods because of the sins of men. In the American Indian legends, the flood from which the red men escaped in various ways also was an act of retribution on the part of a great Manito. Referring to Montezuma's speech to Cortés, Schoolcraft notes that in speaking of Quetzalcoatl as Lord of the 7 caves, it probably is implied that he was the lawful chief of 7 bands, tribes, or nations, and was metamorphosed into a god by the people to whom he had brought culture and enlightenment. The occult traditions tell that in an ancient age there were winged serpents upon the earth. The rulers of Atlantis were known as the serpent-kings, and the winged serpent was their totem. According to the old traditions, the serpent originally walked upright, but because of his pride and sin, he fell. The fallen serpents may well have been the famous Atlantean sorcerer-kings described in Oriental secret lore. Among the Portuguese, there is a legend of a mysterious island called by them Ilha das Sete Cidades, the island of the seven cities, or Antilla. Are these seven cities the seven golden cities of Cibola, for which the Spanish sought in their conquest of Lower California? Are they also the original seven cities ruled over by the feathered serpents or winged seraphs? The thought of the serpents is not so far-fetched when we remember that the Arab geographers always referred to Antilla, or Atlantis, as the Dragon's Isle. Was the dragon the great king Thebetat, the mysterious spirit who ruled Atlantis from the air, unseen at any time, and according to the ancient traditions, whose agents upon the earth were the serpent-kings who carried his feathered scepter as a symbol of their regency? If so, then the natural symbol for this dragon king, lord of the seven cities or nations, would be the seven-headed serpent which is perpetuated as the seven-headed Naga of Cambodia. Similarly, the Atlantean Empire is represented by a strange dragon whose heads represent the sources of the race and whose long coils reveal the migrations of the Atlanteans in their serpentine path across the world. The account of Atlantis being under the dominion of a great invisible being may have given rise to certain Celtic legends, particularly those dealing with the account of how Ireland was originally peopled by an invisible race and ruled over by an aerial king. These myths may have come to Ireland by way of the men from the sea, accounts of whom have been preserved in their traditions. Their descendants, the Druids, were the snakes whom St. Patrick is supposed to have destroyed. Both Homer and Horace apparently sensed the allegorical import of Atlantis, for by reading between the lines one gathers from their writings the impression that to them Atlantis signified a superior universe or higher world, possibly the one which descended into matter when the physical universe was created. This was the fabled Eden, or that antediluvian sphere referred to in scriptures as ruled over by the kings of Edom. Atlantis thus becomes the Elysian fields, or the abode of the blessed, and the Avalon of the Welsh. The Atlantides, or seven islands, are described by early mythologists as the seven Pleiades, the daughters of Atlas, for they were lifted out of the depths on the shoulders of the great giant of the earth. It should be remembered that ancient myths must be interpreted by seven different keys. Therefore, each fable signifies the seven different phases of universal development. In order that the wide extent of the Atlantis story may better be appreciated, let us consider the words of Louis Jacoliot, a French writer on Oriental philosophies. In his Histoire des Vierges, he shows that there are traditional accounts of both the continent and the disaster which destroyed it preserved among nearly all civilized people. A religious belief common to Malacca and Polynesia, the two opposite extremes of the oceanic world, affirms that all these islands once formed two immense countries, inhabited by yellow men and black men, always at war, and that the gods, wearied with their quarrels, having charged ocean to pacify them, the latter swallowed up the two continents, and since then it has been impossible to make him give up his captives. The other continent referred to by Monsieur Jacoliot is unquestionably Lemuria, a great area of land which is said to have disappeared prior to the sinking of Atlantis, leaving only the Australasian archipelago. Fragmentary information concerning these continents is continually coming to light in different parts of Asia, and geology adds its confirmation to the old traditions. A discussion of Atlantis would be incomplete without a brief outline of the causes for its disappearance. The explanation given in the old occult writings is substantially as follows. The great King Thebetat, the invisible dragon, is what Eliphas Levi called the astral light. This is the same force which the Knights Templars were accused of worshipping under the name of the Goat of Mendes. The astral light is the sphere of sorcery, or what the ancients termed infernal magic. The ruler of this sphere is the great fire prince, Samael, who is supposed to have taken upon himself the form of a serpent when he seduced Eve. His is the sphere of fire, or more correctly, the sphere of ambition with which the ancients identified the martial spirit. The Atlanteans were natural psychics. They could see the invisible worlds and possessed in part the secret of functioning in them. But they did not understand completely the mystery of the astral light. Nearly all Aboriginal peoples worship various forms of demons, elementals, spirits, and ghosts. The present red and black races are of Atlantean origin, and their demons, shades, specters, wraiths, and vampires are characters which their progenitors actually saw or precipitated by the power of imagination in the subtle, fluidic essence of the astral light. The question as to what caused the destruction of Atlantis, then, is very simply answered. The Atlanteans did not possess the power to control the imagery projected into the astral light by human thought and emotion. Atlantis never produced a philosopher. How then, might be asked, can an individual or a race possess supernatural power without philosophy? This question can be answered by another. Why are mediums so often illiterate and, though usually quite ignorant of the affairs of the living, yet have the ability to talk with the dead? The Atlanteans, like the mediums, did not possess supernatural powers. They were possessed by the powers. They were moved by the astral light like a planchette. As the sphere of the astral king was one of excess and fury, he poured forth his qualities through them, until the whole civilization collapsed in a common ruin. Before the destruction of the continent, the Atlanteans were divided, for within a portion of the people was born the realization of personal responsibility. These escaped from the rulership of the Dragon King and, obeying the instructions of the Great White Lord, prepared for themselves a better destiny. When the destruction came and the sorcerers were consumed by the fire which they themselves had invoked, the white adepts, led by the great father of the Thinkithians, Noah, escaped and established themselves in lands which survived the great destruction. The demon king, Thevetat, did not always control Atlantis. He gradually gained dominion over it as an evil habit gradually gains control of human life, until he finally obsessed the land. The Atlantean adepts, superior beings who incarnated in Atlantis to protect the people, could no longer protect the continent from the demons of the astral light, and so they became the leaders of the several migrations. These adepts were also termed serpents, but with them the serpent had been raised as is described in the Bible. Quetzalcoatl is symbolized by an upraised snake and is pictured as carrying a cross. He is one of these white adepts, for it is declared in the codices that he was a white man, a term which may mean purity rather than color. In the great chain of civilization, Atlantis is the missing link without which many of the greatest mysteries of anthropology must remain unsolved. Also, as Ignatius Donnelly reminds us, Atlantis is the unsuspected basis of nearly all great world mythologies, with their weird tales of giants and demons battling for ages against the gods. It is my present purpose to indicate the true secret of Plato's account of Atlantis. The historical existence of the continent will someday be established, but the philosophical Atlantis is a more difficult riddle. In Plato's account are to be found all of the elements necessary to reveal the true secret. As great saints and heroes of the past have come to be identified with the religious doctrines which they founded, and as a consequence have been deified, so there is a twofold Atlantis. There is the historical continent which sank in the Atlantic Ocean, and the philosophical continent, an ingenious device by means of which Plato revealed and yet concealed the most profound arcana of the Eleusinian mysteries. We shall close this section with another quotation from Monsieur Termier's address to the Institut Oceanographique. I dream of the last night of Atlantis, to which perhaps the last night, that great night of humanity, will bear semblance. The young men have all departed for the war, beyond the islands of the Levant and the distant pillars of Hercules. Those who remain, men of mature age, women, children, old men, and priests, anxiously search the marine horizon, hoping there to see the first sails appearing, heralds of the warrior's return. But tonight the horizon is dark and vacant. How shadowy the sea grows, how threatening is the sky so overcast. The earth for some days has shuddered and trembled, the sun seems rent asunder, here and there exhaling fiery vapors. It is even reported that some of the mountain craters have opened, whence smoke and flames belch forth, and stones and ashes are hurled into the air. Now on all sides a warm grey powder is raining down. Night has quite fallen, fearful darkness. Nothing can be seen without lighted torches. Suddenly seized with blind terror, the multitude rushes into the temples. But lo, even the temples crumble while the sea advances and invades the shore, its cruel clamor rising loud above all other noise. What takes place might indeed be the divine wrath. Then quiet reigns. No longer are there either mountains or shores, no longer anything save the restless sea, asleep under the tropic sky. the Orphic key to the Atlantic fable. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.